We have spent a lot of time over the last several years talking about identity, how it's the new frontier for digital security. It's the first, most critical component securing our digital estate, right? You lose the identity, you've lost everything. So all of our security discussions, probably for the last 7 years now, have been identity focused. But for all the discussions about how to secure it, we haven't really talked a lot about the implications of how we interact with it, how we ask users to interact with it, of the fluid and dynamic and changing nature of identity. And I'm not talking about how identity systems interact necessarily, although there is a bit of that. What I'm talking about is human beings. Human beings are not static objects. When we hire a human being, generally, we try to put as few attributes into an identity system as possible to enable them to get up and running as quickly as possible across whatever our entire digital estate looks like. So we're going to put in a first name, a last name, a display name, some sort of email address, and then we're going to kind of sit back and consider that content to largely be static. But that is not how human beings exist, right? You might put a phone number in Active Directory. That doesn't mean that's that person's phone number forever. People move. People get married. People's personal identities change over time. People graduate. They get doctorates. They get licenses to practice certain things that they then use to trade in as part of their actual name. And they're entitled to do that because that's their identity. We can't take that from them. There's no amount of administration that gives us the authority to tell us a person isn't who they perceive themselves to be. And I say this partially because there was a conversation that I got into on the internet the other day about an organization where the administrative team was trying to support a user who had changed their name. And the systems that the user was interacting with on a day-to-day basis were presenting their former name. Whether it's a marital name, dead name, whatever, doesn't matter. It's a human being who is being forced to look at login details that did not match who they were. And the administrator who was raising the issue was met with a lot of agreement. I've seen it. You've probably seen it if you watched this far. Where administrators don't have the authority to change user attributes. That has to come from on high, whether it's HR or legal. If your identity system accepts that content from a connected system, that may be the end of the story, right? And in fact, Active Directory and Azure Active Directory don't really have an attribute to store old name information. Now we can get away with using things like SMTP addresses, right? We can put 1,000, 1,000,000 of them in there, whatever. Let the users choose their preferred one. And then at least in some systems they appear to be their new name. You can go a step further and make it their reply to address for them as well. Okay, that's great. But they're still being forced to log in and see that data. And again, there's no attribute. There's nowhere I can put it in there and say, hey, for legal payment purposes, this person used to be named this. Get them their paycheck. Let that be the end of the story. That doesn't exist. Now, doesn't mean it can't exist. There actually is a process that you can go through to either extend your schema with a custom attribute and then map that to one of the new custom attributes in AzureAD, or you can just stick that information in one of the extension attributes that's existed since time immemorial. These are not great ways to go about it, right? We still have a responsibility to our users, to our human beings, to recognize that identity is both a critical component of our security posture, but it also represents they are as human beings. And I will tell you quite frankly that years ago, I got a request for a name change from marriage that we were not able to act upon at my previous job for over a year. It was tied up, out of our hands, nothing we could do. That was the excuse I sold myself back then. Before we were able to process the request, I did actually get a never mind email from the user. We had fundamentally failed that human being. I got so fed up as a result of that one failed interaction with a human being that from that moment on, anytime I saw a request for a name change, I processed it. You got a problem with it, you can fire me. And there literally is nothing in the world less complicated than opening up a user's profile page and changing a display name attribute. You can do that. And if HR has a problem with it, then HR can formally submit a request to change it back, to write you up, and they can then explain to the human being on the other end why they are not entitled to the identity that they have chosen for themselves. And I will bet you that will never happen. But for most of us, we can afford to service a human being in a way that makes them feel valuable to the organization, in a way that makes them feel like a whole, complete, realized person. They feel like they were hired because they were valuable. And we recognize that value. Identity is not mutable. We must be cautious that what we are protecting is not attributes, but is in fact people.